Hi everybody, welcome back, glad you could tune in again. So today I want to explore a theme which brings together a couple of things we've been thinking about recently. On the one hand, the subject of work and vocation and so on that we've been thinking about in these devotions for the last few days. And then on the other hand, the book that we were looking at last Thursday evening, Out of the Ashes by Anthony Esolen, and in particular one particular theme from that book which we didn't get a chance to talk about in that much detail, but which nonetheless might be helpful for us to think about briefly. So what I want to do to start with, I'm going to read a list of activities, and I'd like you, as I'm reading them, just to think about them, try and identify what they've got in common, whether you've done any of them, what might be significant about them, which of these you might enjoy doing, and so on. Here's the list, and then I'll make some comments about it. Here goes. Baking bread, smoking meat, making cookies, repairing your car, cutting the grass, laying a patio, building a deck, painting watercolours, catching, filleting and grilling fish for dinner, carving a set of chess pieces by hand from soapstone, riding a horse, feeding a cat, grooming a dog, making a table from an old tree stump, making a knife from an old metal file, brewing your own beer, pressing and drying flowers, knitting a sweater, landscaping your backyard and repairing an old coffee grinder. What do those things have in common? Well, fairly obviously, they are all physical activities. I guess they come under the heading, at least most of them come under the heading of what we might call hobbies. But there are particular kinds of hobbies, aren't there? There are no sports listed. There are no purely intellectual pursuits listed. Not that sports and intellectual pursuits are bad ideas at all. But these hobbies, or activities, or tasks, you might say, are things that we do with our hands, in which we take hold physically of something in the world, whether a pot of paint or a bag of cement or whatever it is, and work with it physically so as to make it more beautiful, make it work, fix it, or whatever the case may be. Now, what has all this got to do with work or vocation? Well, what I want to suggest is that there is something profoundly rich and deeply fulfilling about working with our hands. We're living in an age where a great many of the different things that used to be done by hand are now done by machine or by computer or whatever. And we therefore get out of the habit of working with our hands. My vocation involves almost no manual work at all. And very likely your the particular callings that you have involve a lot less manual work than the analogous callings would have done 50 or 100 or 200 years ago. And in one sense that's great. It means that people don't have to spend all day washing clothes in the river. They can just throw them in a washing machine and they're done in 45 minutes or an hour or so. But it brings with it some costs. And in particular, it has the effect of distancing us from the physical beauty and wonder of things that God has made. I remember the first time I filleted a salmon. It took me about 50 minutes, and I learned to do it. I say learned to do it. I watched a guy on YouTube filleting salmon at the rate of about one every 15 seconds while he was tossed about on a boat somewhere in the North Pacific off the coast of Alaska. And I watched in astonishment as he went zip, 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 and that was it. He'd done the job with these beautiful large salmon that had been caught straight out of the ocean. And I thought, well, that doesn't look too difficult. And 50 minutes later, I discovered that it was a lot more difficult than I'd imagined. But coming face to face with the beauty of this physical thing brought home to me in a fresh and very tangible way the utter wonder and beauty of just this fish. And I don't think I'd have appreciated that if I'd done the obvious thing and just gone out and bought a filleted salmon or some chunks of salmon from the store up the road. Working with our hands, those kinds of activities and countless others, is wonderfully edifying in that it brings us into contact with the wonder of God's creation, which is, after all, a physical thing. And I want to commend it to you, to find something, if you haven't already, and maybe you have already, those things on that list and many, many more besides, to find something, or maybe something new or additional, that you enjoy doing that involves doing something with your hands. I don't think there's any particular biblical verse that we could point to that makes this a requirement, but just the physical character of human beings strongly suggests that this will be a wonderful and edifying experience to us. And hey, there's nothing lost if you try it and then you think, didn't really like that, let's try something else. So much for the connection to our vocation, what we do with our lives. But there was a further connection that was highlighted by Anthony Esolen's book. And it suggests that this connection with the created world might have deeper ideological implications for us, which could be very positive indeed. We were reading, as those of you who are around on Thursday evening will remember, the introduction and just the first chapter of Esolen's book, Out of the Ashes. And where we didn't get to was the discussion at the end of the first chapter. The first chapter is entitled Giving Things Their Proper Names, the Restoration of Truth-Telling. And he talks at some length about the ideological problems that we face as a consequence of the habits of modern journalism and the way that we use language and the way that new words have a tendency of distorting our sense of things and our sense of priorities and so on. But then there's a really moving narrative towards the end in which he talks about the physical things in the world around us. Grafting apples onto the trunk of another tree, clearing trees and stumps from a field, and so on. It goes on for pages and pages and pages, and you get this sense that he's really immersed in the beauty and the wonder of God's physical created world. And then he brings home the ideological implications of this, and it's quite startling. Let me read a paragraph for you. If you've got the book and you want to look it up, it's page 26, the last couple of paragraphs on page 26. Things, he says, referring to these physical things we're talking about, in their beautiful and imposing integrity, do not easily bend to lies. A bull is a bull, and not a cow. You can readily see the connection to some of the gender politics that we've seen in recent months and years. Grass is food for cattle, but not for man. A warbler is alive, but a rock is not. A 300-pound stone will not move for a little child or a boy or a feminist professor. Water expands when it freezes and will break anything unless you allow for it. Things are what they are. They know no slogans, and they do not lie, and they give witness to the glory of God. And that's a hint, a couple of hints at the end there, isn't it, of why it is that the physical created world could help us ideologically, so to speak, in navigating some of the battles that we currently face. People all around us are telling lies about the world. And by losing our physical connection to the physical world around us, we risk making ourselves vulnerable to those lies simply because we're less instinctively familiar with the truth of things than our forebears were. It's really hard to imagine, for example, some of the transgender movement's ideas taking off among a community that just had cows and bulls around, or sheep and rams around. Farming communities where you're in touch with the reality of things have a way of grounding us in what things really are, and things do not bend easily to lies. So some thoughts for you, whether you want to approach this from the ideological standpoint of trying to inoculate yourself against some of the follies of the world around us and the lies of modern ideologies, or whether you want to just rediscover the wonder of enjoying the created world with the hands, the things that God has given us to take pleasure in and delight in and work with, or maybe a little bit of both is what we all really need. I hope that'll encourage you to maybe even think about exploring some of those activities, or hundreds of others like them, any one of the hundreds of others like them. But for now, the Lord bless you, and I hope very much to see you soon. Bye for now.